and welcome to today's webinar on comprehensive liquidity and supply chain resiliency. Thank you for joining us from your home offices, living rooms, kitchen tables, or wherever else you might be today. We ask that everyone please keep their microphones muted. Please feel free to post any questions you have throughout the webinar in the chat box on the lower right side of your screen. We will try to answer them as time allows, but if we do not get to your question, someone from our team will follow up with you. Our presenters today are Craig Jeffery, founder and managing partner of Strategic Treasurer, and Vincent Beerman, the Senior Director of AI and Data Insights at Taulia. Welcome, Craig and Vincent. I will now turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Kai, and it's good to do this webinar with you, Vince. We're different parts of the country, but talking together. So thanks for joining, Vince.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good to be here.
Yeah, so before we get into the outline, let me just cover a few ways that we can stay connected both during today's webinar and at other times. I do recognize that a number of people are having problems joining due to some of the outage across the U.S. Of a major internet provider. We had those issues earlier and went to backup, and now our major provider is up and running. So we're glad to be up there. But how we can stay connected, there's a couple ways. One, outside the webinar, we have the notes section in the upper right-hand piece. You can follow Taulia or Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. We encourage you to do so by just clicking those links now. You can also participate in the Global Recovery Monitor survey. So there's a report that comes out every 2 weeks. There's a podcast, but there's also a 5-minute survey which you can take every other week to gauge recovery actions, issues, concerns, plans, and those the survey changes slightly each period, and some of it is consistent as well. Well worth the 5 minutes to participate and hear what's going on. So there's ways to stay connected in the notes section. There's the chat box, which people are listing information in the screen there on the right-hand side. Feel free to put any questions you have in there or greet each other. Mention where you're from, and that would be that's a good way to stay connected and participate. Finally, we have some polling questions that we do throughout the webinar to gauge where people are, what they're thinking, for those that are on today's actual webinar. So we're excited about those ways of staying connected with you. So we look forward to spending some time with you right now. Thanks for investing an hour of your day in this topic. It's quite great. So what are we going to cover as we look at this concept of liquidity concerns, comprehensive liquidity and supply chain resiliency covers a number of topics. And when we look at the issue and concerns during a time of disruption like we're going through now, there's different disruptive periods that happen from time to time, whether it's natural events, pandemic, global crises, et cetera. Those create particular disruptions which have an impact. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on setting the stage, what the impact is, what people are doing about that. Then we'll look at the situation, how that can impact liquidity in an organization. We'll look at things like levers, how organizations have changed very dramatically in a short period of time. And that's useful as whether you're planning liquidity, you're in the AP part of the business, or even the AR part, or your treasury or finance. We'll look at counterparty issues and regulations. All of these factor into how companies manage their liquidity. And the issue is, do you manage it with a limited set of tools, or can you expand those to provide more flexibility or additional levers? And then we'll look at the reaction. How do we respond? What is our method of prioritizing different activities? And there's multiple steps there. So there's a lot of good information as we look at this layout. And I'll let Vince jump in if there's anything you wanted to add too in terms of the setting the stage for our hour.
Yeah, I think that was well articulated. We deal with a lot of our customers and partners and suppliers across every industry, and everyone is navigating this differently, right? We've got clients that are in the aerospace and transportation business that obviously has been impacted greatly, and we have clients in the grocery business that that frankly are trying to keep up with the demand, the increased demand. And so everyone is dealing with this differently. I have been incredibly inspired and heartened by the outward focus of so many in our network to look at this and not just think of how do I weather this storm and how does my organization make it through, but they're really thinking about their suppliers and the sense of community and family and how do they keep that together. Not only just out of a sense of corporate social responsibility or goodwill towards others, but also a strategic need to be able to restart the business during the recovery. And so everyone is navigating this differently, and as Craig points out, there are dramatic swings, and what Taulia and our partners are doing is trying to give everyone the visibility, the analytics, and the levers to react accordingly to ensure both their financial health as well as their supply chain health. And so we'll talk about that in a little more detail as we move on.
Yeah, thanks, Vincent. And you had shared some things with me earlier, and that was also encouraging. So as we move to what's going on with disruption, for those of you who may know, we put together a Treasury coalition, which we were doing the Global Crisis Monitor, and it's now called the Global Recovery Monitor. We measure information on a weekly basis for 8 weeks, and now we're on a biweekly cycle. So you'll hear about that, and there's opportunities to participate in having your voice heard and getting a lot of information. That's all free, of course. But the issue is we were looking at disruptive elements when people think they'll change. This is a busy chart. If you haven't seen it before, I'll only take a few moments to explain what it is. So the color schemes, the blue, the green, and the orange, represent proportionally the number of people who responded thinking that these were the time frames where these different events would occur. The first one is the health inflection point, where things peak and begin to go down, and mostly that's been sitting at the 1 month period. So that's the look at the inflection point where it begins to diminish. The middle chart, the green one, has to do with the end of a health issue, and those numbers, the little teardrops, represent the weeks or the period. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is through 8 periods, which was 8 weeks. We also have we completed the 9th period, which was another 2 weeks, and then we're in the middle of period 10. So that's taking us out a full 12 weeks. But you can see that's the end of health issue, where it's not that there's the end of the COVID-19 impact, but when it ceases to become a significant health issue, it's maybe more mop-up we have. Perhaps it's because we have an antidote, we have a vaccine, et cetera, so there could be some different elements. But as you look across that, you can see how the perception has moved in terms of the end of a health issue. The inflection point has stayed relatively close, it's staying within a couple weeks through several months of the survey, what the expectations are. The third category, and this is one of about 3 major financial measures that we've taken through the Global Crisis Monitor, is achieving financial normalcy. So this is the concept of when business would return to the state it was prior to the work from home environment, the expansion of COVID across the globe, impacting different regions at different times. And as you can see, there's a significant percentage that think it's beyond 12 months. And it's pretty much moved around the last several weeks between 8 and 11 months as an expectation of getting back to normal financially. And that does provide some guidance and insight as to what's happening. We have a couple other financial measures. I invite you to download the full report to see a few other measures that are more optimistic and changing over time. So some good information there. But that brings us to our first polling question. And we'll slide that over to the screen. Let me explain how to take that in the Adobe Connect environment. If you're in full screen, you may want to come off of full screen because for some browsers and devices it doesn't show up. I'll say come off a full screen. All you need to do is select the circle. That registers the vote. There's no there's nothing else you need to do. If you need to change it, go ahead and select that. So the first one's compared to pre-COVID, we're paying slower, same as faster than normal. And then we also wanted to capture what's the annual spend for those on the webinar, the multiple hundred people. What is it? Is it annually under $500,000 US, between $500,000 and $1 billion, and over $1 billion, just to see what the mix is in this. And we'll go ahead and share those. And then Vince, if you want to be able to talk about those things. So maybe the first thing I'll start with, Vince, is on the right-hand side, it's pretty evenly split between AP spend in these three categories. And actually, at the exact moment, it was 33% for all of them, with 100-something voting.
Yeah.
I never would expect that, but it's a nice mix of size of organizations there. But on the left-hand side, what are your comments on the slower, faster than normal during this crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think that early on, when we were sort of in peak uncertainty, there was a lot of question around, oh my gosh, right? How much cash can I hold on to, right? On a personal level and on a corporate level as well. And so we fielded some questions from some of our clients about, could I turn off my dynamic discounting early payment program, right, in mass? Is there a kill switch, right? Nobody decided to execute on that. And so as things began to return to normal a bit, or at least it appeared that we weren't just going to drop into an immediate Great Depression as a result of this, people began to return to normal payment practices. Now, we have seen some of our clients, and just generally in the industry, some companies move to a practice of trying to pay everyone off of their normal payment terms and more quickly, right? Just as again, either a corporate social responsibility or a measure to ensure supply chain health, just saying, hey, we're going to pay everybody at 15 days, or we're going to pay everybody just as quickly as we can get your invoices approved. We also saw another impact, which was the shutdown of BPO centers and shared service centers. As many of you know, those are concentrated in areas in India, Manila in the Philippines, and other mega cities, which were particularly hard hit by the virus. And so we saw a slowdown in just general B2B document volume, because documents were unable to be processed because those shared service centers were vacant. And so, we reached out and put something in place for a rapid response to get those documents flowing again. So there was a bit of a bubble there where there were some late payments just due to operational issues. But what we've seen in general across our network is that most companies are doing their best to make payments at least on time, if not trying to accelerate more of those payments to help the small and medium-sized businesses across their supply chain. So again, I'm very encouraged by that outward focus and mentality of ensuring that the overall vitality of the economy and the supply chains stay in place, and these larger corporates are recognizing that maybe they have a little bit more inherent resiliency, and they can weather the storm a little bit longer with some deeper pockets. And so there are definitely some outreach efforts going on to ensure that the small businesses are getting the cash they need.
Yeah, thanks, Vince. And just and we'll pull these off, but just notice the paying slower than normal is just about 25% on the participants today. But let's look at some results from the Global Crisis Monitor. This is one of the earlier weeks where we saw about 33% or so extended their payment terms, which is a little bit larger than what's happening with the population on the phone today. There's some of the reasons why it was extended, and Vince mentioned, third-party providers, right? They can't go to work, they can't process payments out, and so that could have an impact there. That was 8% of the population at the time. And then there's the work from home slowing the process, and then there's the intentional conserving cash and managing the outflow. So that's pretty significant. And then I think we're at just under 1%, paying a little faster, and it was sitting at 2%. A later week during the survey, we found that it was about 40, it moved up over 40%. We're paying more slowly than average. So this is just one snapshot. And so it's nice to see that number coming down. But I think that certainly makes the case that payments can slow down. This can be, just like if your body goes into shock, all the blood goes to your core of your body and your extremities get cold. That can be the first response. And not everyone has as mature of an outlook as some of Vince's customers with, trying to support the overall environment. But that certainly comes back to the forefront, as you say. I can't destroy my suppliers because I need them, and how can I best support them while maintaining liquidity? That becomes a core issue in times of disruption because much is changing, and you have to look at yourself and other parties. But it's very interesting to see this. I find this very fascinating to see how that changes on a week-by-week basis and how it's different from static times. Before we move off, Vince, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add on this slide as we looked at, 33% were extending payment timings.
Yeah, I think that there's interesting effects, and there's always trade-offs here, and as companies are making these really difficult decisions about furloughing employees and right, who do you pay first, right? Do you pay employees first? Do you pay suppliers first? Right? And then there's also the inbound of am I being paid more slowly, and therefore do I just not have the cash to pay my suppliers on time? And depending on the size of the business and the reserves in your treasury, you have more capacity to absorb those shocks and to not have those difficult trade-off decisions to make. So as I said, every business is different, and every business faces these challenges and these trade-offs a little bit differently. But yeah, it seems that the population here in the poll, lined up pretty closely to this. 55-60% paying about the same, and that's great to see. And the amazing part to me is that everybody's doing this while working from home and homeschooling their kids and training their puppies and doing all the things that they're doing. And just, kudos to everyone on this call who's making that happen, because, this is an unprecedented shift in our work arrangement. And the fact that IT teams have kept everybody's laptops working and somehow the internet hasn't collapsed is pretty remarkable. So I'm, again, just encouraged by that fact that businesses are continuing to operate and payments are going out.
Yeah, and that brings us to another survey, and Vince and I were talking, and he's able to share some information from one of their surveys about some other needs and demands for cash flow across the cash conversion cycle. So Vince, I was wondering if you could talk us through some of these.
Yeah, so this we do an annual supplier survey late in the year, usually around the end of the third quarter, and these numbers change a little bit year to year. But just as a summary here, suppliers look for liquidity levers as much as the large corporates do, and we always remind ourselves, and it has become a mantra for us that. Our customers are both the suppliers in our network as well as the buyers, and unlike some of our competitors, we don't derive any direct revenue from the suppliers in our network, right? But we focus on them, and we develop new tools so that they can execute their working capital strategies, and strengthening them and strengthening their relationships is critical. So that 34% there, right, use early payments as a tool to help them overcome gaps in their cash flow, right? That they see these programs, SDF or dynamic discounting, as a tool in their tool belt that they can use to make sure that they can make payroll, or right, that they can meet their critical KPIs. In general, 56%, say that they want to be paid early, at least some of the time. I'm always surprised by that number. because I would think it would be 100%. Being paid earlier is always better than being paid later. So I always kind of try to unpack the behavioral economics behind that question of why would somebody say no, and maybe it's because they think if they say yes to Taulia's survey, someone's going to call them and try to pitch them on early payments. But in general, being paid earlier is always preferable to being paid later. But we see a huge majority of suppliers saying, if the economics are right, then they always want that cash in their organization to reinvest and be able to fuel their businesses with that. And about 40% say that it is not uncommon for them to be paid late. And some, leverage early payment programs for payment assurity. And that's something we see again and again in the surveys that we run, is knowing when that cash is coming is as important as when it comes, right? If they can plan whether they're going to get that cash at day 9 or day 90, they can adjust their strategy and their business accordingly. But it's the assurity of knowing it. And so we've added some additional tools for our suppliers that let them decide on a DSO basis or a days to maturity basis or other things how they want to receive that cash. And that's our goal and our objective, is to unlock that working capital for both buyers and suppliers, and let suppliers decide when and how they want to be paid, and let buyers likewise decide when and how they want to pay. So and I'll be interested to see in our upcoming survey, and we've been kicking around the idea of running an off-cycle survey, but probably there's some survey fatigue out there. Lots of folks being asked lots of questions, trying to find signal in the data. So coming up on this year, whether these numbers will move significantly as we come out of the crisis. But by and large, everybody would like to be paid early, and at least they want the ability to control when that cash comes in. Let me click here, and I'll hand it back to Craig to talk a little bit about the same topic.
Yeah, I was thinking of your question about who wouldn't want to be paid early. I guess if you're not on the accrual basis and you're on the cash basis, and it would increase or impact your income, that could be an example, or other factors. But good questions. I appreciate you sharing some of the information from that survey. A couple other items coming from the Global Crisis Monitor. The most negative issue related to corporate liquidity each week had to do with accounts receivable. Right now here we're showing week 2 and 3 just as indicative numbers of how many people were concerned, or their top concern, negative versus positive, was showing up. And obviously there's concerns across the spectrum of different areas, whether you have a MAC clause, material adverse condition clause, like on the bottom, concerned about what the banks may be offering, all the way to what the central bank is doing, and they're providing enough liquidity to banks and to the markets, whether it's some of the providing liquidity for money market funds, the instruments that are there, so that people can convert to cash as quickly as possible. Those are all issues, but accounts receivable has been the most negative through the entire length of the survey. So we're into 12 weeks now. Always the most negative, very negative. Many organizations were seeing a deterioration on a week-by-week basis in their outlook for accounts receivable. And that's a key area for cash flow. And you can see those the concerns, more concerned versus less concerned, showing up over time. And the blue over the orange is a significant issue, and about a third are sitting in the middle on a week-by-week basis. We have more information than that as well, so we'll jump to the top concerns by week. So this is a different question. We've asked it every period except week 3, and so now we're in period 10, which is the period 9 and period 10 are both 2-week periods. You can see what's changed over time, and so we talk about this elements of managing comprehensive liquidity, and overlaying that in times of disruption, whether it's a financial crisis, a pandemic, a forced work from home, or whatever the events are that are happening, we like to see what people are thinking over time. So this is a question where you have to force rank 7 items, and we've done this a lot of times. So in the beginning, number 1 was business continuity plan completeness. And if you look back and you look on the calendar, this is when most of the U.S. and a large part of Europe was moving to work from home. So now it's, can we connect? Can everyone connect? Can our VPN work and get us access to the systems we need? Can we communicate, et cetera? So that took number 1. After a couple of weeks, that had moved down to 3rd, and it's continued to cycle down to near the bottom as we've progressed through the work from home environment. Same type of issue with staff safety protocols. Well, that was pretty hot in the beginning because everyone was concerned, as they were being exposed, and we were, seeing the numbers rise of infections and some of the mortality coming out of that. But then everyone was working from home, and it moved down to, by week 8, it was in the last position. Period 9, it moved up to number 2 for those that selected it as their top issue, and that's as companies and entities were beginning to or contemplating return to work. Now everyone's exposed again, and so there was that moved up on the top. That's just some background for the deck. I know this is a discussion about liquidity, comprehensive liquidity, but I think it's helpful to see how health concerns, where you work, preparedness, et cetera, all have some impact on one another. But look at the bottom 3 rows. You can see we've highlighted them for top level. So direct financial impact to the business had the second most number 1 selections in the beginning. And then it moved to first or tie for first every single period. So the concern about this disruption was the overall financial impact, very related to liquidity, of course, because that's a key driver of it. The next one is also related to liquidity. This is access to adequate liquidity to run your business. It wasn't the top concern right in the beginning. It moved to second place and was sitting around second and third place for about 7 weeks, and then week 8, period 9, which was another couple weeks, it's moved into the 3rd position. And then the overall impact on recession in the regions that the organizations operate, moved up and is sitting in the 3rd or the 2nd category through the second half of the testing period that we've had. And I just mentioned that as normal times can create a significant concern and a drive for optimizing your liquidity position and the tools you have to manage that. And it really becomes extraordinarily valuable when you have that flexibility during times of disruption. So I just point that out as, here's other sets of data that show why that is, and we know that's important, but it also shows, where our attention can move at different times. And with that, Vince, I think there's probably some things you want to say here too. I want to make sure you had a moment to make some comments.
Yeah, thanks. This is as a data geek, self-proclaimed data geek. I love seeing this, right? And behavioral economics is my other passion. But the way that we looked at this, we sat down in kind of our war room, crisis center, whatever you want to say, on our Zoom call, and talked about what can Taulia do to help our network and our clients. And it aligns, and in hindsight, it's nice to see that what we decided to do aligns with what the concerns were in the market, right? And that first week 1, that business continuity, those early weeks of like, oh my gosh, our shared service center in Manila is offline. What are we going to do, right? Was to reach out to just say, how do we keep things flowing, and how do we keep the gears from grinding to a halt, right? And that dissipated in the course of about a month, to where people figured out how to make it work and how to work from home and how to shift things to a more electronic basis on both sides, right? And the buyers and suppliers really came together to get through that. The other things that we decided to do were accelerate the release and make it available to all of a couple of products that really relate to this direct financial impact of the business and access to adequate liquidity. And those are a cash forecasting tool. Cash forecasting is always kind of at the top of treasurers' list of priorities and things that they wish they had better tools around. And because of our deep integration to the ERP, we have that document level visibility. And we've got a great data science team that has spent the last 2 years building algorithms to make individual predictions. And so where treasurers used to have conversations with the CFO about the cash forecast and what was coming, in the salad days and in the long economic summer that we experienced before this crisis, those conversations were, regular but not frequent, and they were with the CFO, and the CFO would carry the message forward. What we see and hear now is that those treasury conversations have been elevated to the CEO level and to the board level. What's happening? What's our cash position? What are the outflows that we expect over the coming weeks and months? What are the inflows that we expect over the coming weeks and months? And so cash forecasting has really been elevated because everyone is hyper concerned about that direct financial impact. What is the state of our business? Are we making goods? Are we selling goods? Are we paying out? Are we collecting? And then they're again aware of that liquidity availability, not just for themselves, but for their suppliers. And so the other thing we did was make available a financial supply chain analytics dashboard, which helps them understand, am I reaching all the corners and nooks and crannies in my supply chain and making liquidity available to them to ensure that my supply chain doesn't look like Swiss cheese as I start to come out of the recovery. And so it aligns well with those concerns, and we've seen a lot of interest in those tool sets and moving beyond just kind of early payments, dynamic discounting, supply chain finance as a set it and forget it type of program to more, I need to actively manage this, and I need to do it to ensure access for my suppliers, as much as anything. And then I need to keep close watch on how I'm paying and what that forecast looks like in the near and midterm. So that's what we saw, that's what we heard from our clients, and they are looking to us and to all of their providers for help in those key areas of forecasting and ensuring access to liquidity for themselves and their suppliers.
Yeah, and that brings us to our second set of poll questions, which is just a single poll question. This one is you can select all that apply, so you can select 1, 2, or all 3, and just click in the boxes and it'll register it. If you're unable to do that, then you're in full screen. Just come out of full screen, and then it should work, and then you can go back to full screen when you're done, so you can see the results. So we'll give everybody just a few moments to register your votes. This is, we're moderately to highly concerned about the following: our access to capital, the financial position of our suppliers, the financial position of our customers, our ability to pull financial levers in the cash conversion cycles. Levers are too short, there's not enough of them, we need more flexibility. So you can select none, 1, 2, 3, or 4. So give it just another moment, let the numbers get up into the multiple hundreds. Yeah, I think we're in a good spot. So we'll go ahead and show these, and Vince, I'll invite you to comment on it. So number 1 is probably not so surprising. People are concerned about the financial position of their customers. Their customers pay them. That's number 1. That ties into the accounts receivable side. Maybe you could talk about the financial position of our suppliers. That's sitting at about a little over 3 in 10, almost 1 in 3. Any thoughts on this data?
Yeah, I guess it's not too surprising, right? You want to make sure that you're going to get paid on the stuff you've already made and delivered, and you want to ensure that that demand is going to remain robust. As I mentioned, the transportation sector right now is really concerned about right how many cars and planes and trains things am I going to be able to ship in the coming quarters? And so, and are those airlines going to still be ordering planes, and are those consumers still going to be buying cars and all of that? So, that's the cornerstone of your business is revenue. So it's not surprising that, 3 quarters are most concerned about their continued revenue stream. Right, and then that split of access for ourselves and access for our suppliers is kind of this, what I consider to be an enlightened and communal perspective of access to the liquidity to run your business. There's, kind of the Machiavellian supply chain management of us versus them, and squeezing your suppliers, and if you can't deliver for us, we'll find somebody else who can. I think those days are waning, and we're seeing this more cooperative group of companies and industries saying we're all in this together, and we are all one large enterprise, even if we're made up of lots of individual companies, and we have to ensure that liquidity. And to some extent, that's the basis of what I'll call enlightened supply chain finance, which is we're a big company with access to incredibly cheap capital. We should spread that down our supply chain to everyone who helps us deliver that good. And Craig, I can remember in talking in the early conceptual phase of this webinar, we were talking about Tesla, right? And how if Tesla has a supplier that makes one plastic button that goes on their dashboard, and that supplier goes out of business, that $100,000 car can't roll off the end of the line, and they're going to disappoint their customers. And you brought up a great poem, and I'm sorry, I sourced it at the time, and now I've forgotten it. For want of a nail, right? And so, for want of a nail, the shoe was lost, and for want of a shoe, the horse was lost, and all of that. And I looked it up, and it's a fantastic poem. But yeah, people are really aware that small little niche provider in their supply chain can just have a debilitating impact on their ability to deliver to their customers. So again, I'm just encouraged to see this, that just almost as many are most concerned about the financial position of their suppliers as they are their own.
Yeah, very good. Thanks so much, and thanks everybody for answering this poll question and the poll questions we run through here. We find it fascinating and helpful as we're dialoguing, mostly one-sided, but this provides you as an attendee a way to communicate and share in addition to questions in the box. But that brings us to this topic of corporate liquidity. And again, this is from the same survey, the Global Crisis Monitor, the Global Recovery Monitor. So I'm sorry I've said that name 100 times so far. I'll probably only say it 10 or 12 more times. But this is looking at what's shifting and changing over the corporation's liquidity outlook. So it's a week-by-week review, a period-by-period review, and how has it changed compared to the prior week. So if you look at you look at the remain the same option, that's green. So it started a little over 40%. By week 3, it dipped down to 30%. We're feeling their position was the same. Then as it progressed, you can see we're sitting at somewhere between 45% and a little over 50%. Felt it stayed the same. But you can see a pretty big change between those who felt it deteriorated, which is like the first downward slash of an X in the orange, and then you can see those that felt it improved as the slow, upwardly sloping slash on the of the X, and you see them crossing between week 4 and 5. So seeing that they've been improved, it was very negative in the first 3 weeks. Started picking up by week 4, and between week 4 and 5, that's where it flipped from more organizations felt their position had deteriorated versus improved on this week-by-week look back. And so now we can see a spread between those that feel their liquidity outlook and their position has improved. And so this is part of the dramatic situation of when we have some type of disruptive event. what can happen. And this, in our view, points to having more levers and the benefit of having more levers. And I'll turn that over again to this picture we have, and I'll start, and Vince can add some here. This is the idea of, hey, there's how are we managing liquidity? It's a challenge. It's a battle, if you will. How do I manage my working capital? Besides inventory, we have accounts payable. If I pay slower, I have greater liquidity. If I can collect faster, I can increase that. There's also this one company's AP is the other side's AR. So it's not completely disconnected. And if there's only two parties, there's a limitation of how much I can extend, et cetera. But these are two areas that have an impact. The third that helps grease the skids is typically in a treasury domain of access to credit, whether it's a committed line, uncommitted line, a revolver that can use and provide liquidity. So you can see there in this case we've got logs and then people pushing it wearing work clothes or casual clothes. The concept here is we have levers. How many levers do we use? Do we just use accounts receivable, ask people to pay sooner? Do we also use AP? And then can we also leverage some third-party credit? And Vince, I know you had a number of things to say on the AP side, and hopefully I didn't take away all the stuff that you were going to say. But why don't you go ahead and weigh in?
No, I think you framed it really well, right? And that's where Taulia providing the levers to corporates where they can decide, right, how hard they're going to push that box up the hill, and how much they can assist with that credit in greasing the skids to let suppliers, AR teams pull that box up the hill. So, some are sitting on plenty of cash right now, and they're pleased to pay their suppliers early at a reasonable discount rate, and likewise, there are some that say, hey, I need to hold my cash for myself, right? My AR team is pulling as hard as they can, and I need to not be pulling the other direction on our cash conversion cycle with AP, so I'm going to work on extending my DPO as long as I can, but I'm going to help my suppliers pull their box up the hill by adding supply chain finance and adding third-party credit. And again, where those two groups, if you look at them as, you can look at the picture as one company, and AR is pulling and AP is pushing, and that's your cash conversion cycle, and you're managing those two metrics in concert. Or you can look at as suppliers, AR teams, and buyers, AP teams are working not in less of a confrontational, please pay me, hey, we'll pay you when we want to pay you kind of, us versus them mentality, and in more of a cooperative, hey, yeah, we'd love to get you the cash you need to grow your business, to pay your people, to et cetera, and so let us help you, and we can help you with our own cash because we've got it, or we can help you with third-party cash through an SCF program. And so we like the fact that we're giving both sides levers to have a cooperative discussion about how to fuel the entire supply chain. And then we bring different funders to bear who are interested in participating in this block pulling party to get that up the hill faster, and those funders can participate in, and whenever that's a cooperative discussion between AP and suppliers AR, the funders like that even more because there's more clarity in data, there's more certainty, there's less risk, and that drives down that cost of capital. So it's a very virtuous cycle as we see it when we can get it onto that cooperative footing and say how best do we add money to the equation to fuel the business.
Yeah, that changes it from the win-lose, lose-win to some additional flexibility in that cycle. What else have we seen? And just quickly, just a few points on this slide is what's changed in volatile time frames. We look at government bond yields. We saw it move from 0.5% to 1.25%. in a period of 9 days. And so there's volatility in terms of capital, access, and liquidity in the market. And this is something to be mindful of. Things during, I guess, the salad days, as you talked about, they can be very stable. And then when there's a change, it can be very dramatic very quickly, and there becomes a rush to convert to cash, and it's not always as graceful as we'd like.
Yeah.
And Vince, if there's nothing else that you'd like to add on that, we'll move to, I'll turn it over to you for regulations and counterparty issues, because these have an impact as well on the cash conversion cycle, as well.
Yeah. As you said, the one thing on that prior slide is it may not always be pretty, right? Anytime there's changes in the market, it creates stress and conflict and the potential for win-lose thinking. And I haven't seen, despite the incredible stress, personally, professionally, at a business level and an individual level, we haven't seen as much of that. And so, as you point out, right, there's a couple of things. There are a growing number of prompt payment practices and laws in place in the UK, across the European Union, and there's been a particular amount of press around this in Australia about governments stepping in and regulatory bodies stepping in, and really, with kind of a blunt tool, actually saying, you must pay all of your small suppliers in some predefined window, and that's just adding stress. It it prevents those two parties from negotiating what are fair practices, and they're doing it in the interest of saying that this is an asymmetrical negotiating relationship between a very large company and a very small one. And so I understand the sentiment, but they're also creating this regulatory burden on being able to report those things. And so that's another additional stress on procurement and AP and Treasury to balance that against their own working capital objectives. And then on the other side, supply chain management, right? And terms extensions inherently are kind of moving working capital burden from the buyer to the supplier, and some suppliers can weather that, and others cannot. And then if it's an asymmetrical, negotiating relationship that either puts an undue stress on the supplier, or it ends up coming back in increased cost of goods, right? Which just is playing the shell game between working capital and hard costs. And so this can harm suppliers and boomerang back to the company, as I said. And there's been more focus now on rather than saying, oh gosh, we got through that, we moved everybody to 90 days, yay us, right? And like we did it, to we need to do something, right? We need to adjust our cash conversion cycle. We need to adjust our DPO to remain competitive against our peers. But we want to ensure that that doesn't come at the cost of our suppliers' financial health. And so there's been more focus on monitoring that health, and we and others have provided more tools to be able to do that. So not just the reporting to ensure you're in compliance, but the proactive monitoring of the health of your suppliers. So again, that's great to see, and we're supporting that in all the ways that we can. As Craig pointed out, this isn't a win-lose scenario, right? It's not a zero-sum game. I thought this was a particularly nice illustration that if everybody were to pay on the due date every time, the expectation is there, the certainty is there, you negotiate what is a fair payment term between the buyer and the supplier, and that's that top graph there, right? Payment comes in on time, receivable matches up. If you pay late or you extend terms, the buyer benefits by being able to make that payment later, but the supplier suffers by getting their money later and having to bear that burden on their DSO and in their working capital strategy. And then you have the notion of supply chain finance, and where the buyer can determine, again, when they want to pay, and as long as they are within the regulatory guidelines and they can get their supplier to agree to that, that's fair play. And likewise, if we can make that available for early payment using supply chain finance, the supplier can opt to be paid on day 10 and the buyer doesn't have to pay until day 90. And if that cost of capital is low, both parties benefit. The buyer gets their DPO where they need it, the supplier gets their DSO where they need it, and both parties benefit, and the funder comes into play and injects that additional working capital, and kind of the whole system benefits, and it becomes a win-win scenario. So a couple of things talking about how we prioritize, and I talked a little bit about the time horizons, right? And certainly in today's world, more than ever, cash is king, and this notion of liquidity triage and prioritization of strategic elements is more important than ever. And so we've had lots of conversations with our business consultants, our clients, our suppliers as well, about ensuring liquidity, keeping the business alive, right? Is the airway and the circulatory system, is the heart beating, or the lungs pumping? And okay, we're all right. And we saw some of that in some of the survey results that Craig shared earlier, that most businesses have come through to where they can kind of see on the horizon that business will return to some sort of new normal. And now they're turning more focus to ensuring their supply chain will be there and have the cash to grow back with them as the factories come back online, as this, consumer demand that's pent up in our houses and our living rooms, and we're allowed to go back out and shop and resume life as normal. There will probably be some bumpiness in the recovery, where we all run out and get clothes to replace the ones that our kids have gone through in the last 3 months, and all of that stuff. And so ensuring that you can quickly spin those things back up, and that you can recover quickly is becoming more and more the focus, right? And then enhancing the posture. So do we have the levers necessary to push liquidity into our supply chain, because we're seeing delayed orders and purchase orders that aren't being confirmed and things like that? Gosh, we got to get more money into our suppliers so they can support us as we grow, or we need some additional cash. And so do you have both levers? Can you push and pull? Can you focus on your own liquidity? Can you focus on your supplier's liquidity? Not and have those things not be mutually dependent. So that's what we want to focus on in the coming months, is ensuring that everybody has the levers they need throughout the supply chain to drive that cash to the most effective points across the supply chain, from the large business down to the small business, and make sure everyone can thrive through the recovery process. So I think we've got one more poll question that we wanted to take.
Yeah, and this is, again, it's a multiple choice. You can select all that apply, and we're weighing the following areas just to see, gauge what's going on about liquidity. We want as much credit. We want to help, we can't help our suppliers as much as we can. We want to change and enhance our posture, or we're strong across all areas. If people could respond to that quickly, I'll go ahead and share the results as they're coming in, because I think we have a few more key concepts to go through. So please, just keep answering. Seems like the biggest one is supply chain resiliency. Helping suppliers is a top issue, and a nice percentage, 44, 45%, are strong across all areas. So sorry for being so quick, but we're going to move that off to the side, and then I'll turn it back over to you to talk about some of the levers that we covered.
Yeah. So the way we look at this is you can't understand which levers you want to pull or push on until you know where you stand, right? And that's not always as easy as it sounds, given the labyrinth of the ERP landscapes and reporting systems, and some of those are well connected, and you're able to pull the information you need to understand that very quickly. Others are challenged. They're a business that has grown by acquisition, and they've got 16 different ERP systems spread across 3 regions of the globe, and just pulling an AP or an AR report is challenging. And by the time you gather all that data, it's out of date and it's stale and you can't do the analysis you need. And so that becomes very time consuming for Treasury and AP and all the parties involved. And so we want to free up time. We want to help with two kind of key areas, which is to free up time so you can focus on the strategic elements of your business and how to allocate cash and how to ensure you have access to liquidity that you need. And then if you have surplus cash, we want to maximize that invested cash and ensure that it's not just sitting idle. And that might mean pushing it into your supply chain, or it might mean just understanding how much surplus you have and for how long you'll have that surplus, so you can invest it either in your own business or in the markets to maximize your return and grow your business. So understanding where you are and where you will be in the coming months and quarters is critical for those two pieces, right? And so automating those pieces of reporting, RPA, using AI and machine learning to help do some of that heavy lifting is critical to be able to invest that cash most effectively in your own supply chain or in other areas. And to do that, it has to be accurate, right? And it has to be timely, and it has to be continuous. And so focusing on that accuracy helps grease the skids, if you will, to make all of those decisions and pull on those levers in ways that positively impact both your own business and your suppliers. And if you understand those things and you feel confident in the accuracy of your forecasts and the accuracy of how your programs, if you have early payment programs, how those are going to perform, how that's going to impact your cash pools, et cetera, then you can really focus on the strategic rather than the tactical of reporting and analyzing and trying to forecast it and predict. And so in order to be able to accurately focus on strategy and pull those levers in strategic ways, you have to know where you stand and you have to trust in the reporting and the forecasting that you're using. So the way that we look at ensuring supply chain resiliency and thinking kind of about that in a holistic way, we want to empower decision making and strengthen your strategy. And that means sharing that information across those groups that need to interact from procurement and AP and AR and Treasury and management, right, to make those better decisions strategically. You have to put the tools in place across the teams. It can't be one set of tools for one team and a different set of tools for a different team. In order to believe those numbers and trust those numbers and that accuracy, you have to be able to drill down to the specifics. What do we want to do at the supplier level or even the invoice level or the receivable level, right? I got to get down to the detail, or it's all kind of high level and objectives and goals, but we can't figure out how to execute against those KPIs. You got to do all of this in an environment of increased compliance burden and ensuring you're paying your suppliers on time according to the law and according to a sense of fairness and according to a way to keep and grow the best suppliers, because companies compete on the strength of their supply chain. And then you want to improve performance, and that requires strong suppliers. So that's a bit the way we think about it. And we do this by benchmarking against your peers to understand where you are and where you can improve, assess those opportunities in how to improve and how that'll impact your financial position. Those output some options. We could do A, B, a combination of A and B. And so we talk about those trade-offs a lot with our clients, and then be able to look out to the next horizon and plan ahead. So I skipped through this last slide a little bit because I'm conscious of our time. But if there's anything that I can answer in more detail about how we think about this, we've got some scenario planners in terms of working capital and assessing those trade-offs and options that are really helping our clients look out and strategically plan their future and ensure they're doing that with their suppliers in mind. So I will turn it back to Craig and Kai to wrap up here.
Yeah, thanks, Vince, for sharing so much good information, data, and insights. I know there's a lot more here on this topic that we could cover, and perhaps we'll have some more webinars in the future. But I wanted to thank you and thank everyone for attending. And I'll turn it over to Kai for wrap-up announcements. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Please visit our website for upcoming webinars. We will stay online for a few more minutes, so if you have any questions, please include those in the chat box. Otherwise, thank you for joining us.